Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special podcast titled The Legacy of Doug. I am here with the creator of Doug, Jim Jinkins. Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for asking.
It's been a while since you've been a guest on our podcast, so I've recently watched your television spots on The Splat, and I also heard the Nickelodeon animation podcast with Hector Navarro. So how does it feel with everybody going around and celebrating Doug's 25th anniversary?
Well, some of this, okay, one thing is obvious, and that is the way time is just flashing by. The notion of 25 years is hard to wrap my head around. It tells me that the core of the fan base are like in their mid-20s, early 30s maybe. It's amazing. But yeah, it's cool to think that Doug is relevant so many years later. I think that's fabulous.
What was it like reuniting with some of the cast members from Doug, like Fred Newman and Billy Weston and Vanessa Coffey, who was the vice president of the Nicktoons at the time?
Well, it's been great. It all has gone great. Seeing Vanessa, I still love her because Vanessa said yes. She's the one that saw the thing I brought into this beginning of a thing called Nicktoons, and she's the one that said yes. So I'll forever be indebted to her for changing my life. And every time we see each other, it's just wonderful. And Fred Newman's been a pal for a long time. I mean, we met each other on the road back when we were working on Nickelodeon shows. He was on a show called Livewire, and I was on a show called Pinwheel, which was really the beginning of Nickelodeon. And we just traveled all over the country, promoting Nickelodeon. This is back in like the 1980s. So we're long friends. And Billy, I had not seen in a while. And only because we just haven't kept in touch as well as I would have liked to have. I didn't know how that would go. And he was spectacular, just very charming and fun and funny, and we had a blast.
Wonderful. And there are a few questions about the original Doug when looking back on it. I actually did a video just about a few weeks ago called How Did Doug Become Influential with Its Simplicity? And there was some things I wanted to ask you about, just the core of, Doug and his friends and the setting. So, I know that a lot of Doug was based off of you, and it was based off of the people that you knew. But I was wondering, are you still in touch with a lot of the people who were inspired by the character shown in Doug, or have you guys lost touch a while back?
Well, a couple of things have helped us stay in touch. The first one just is being Doug. I mean, back when Doug premiered, we made these little postcard announcement cards saying, here comes Doug on Nicktoons and all that. And I would send out special messages, especially to the guy, his name is Tom Roberts, who's the real Skeeter, and to Patty Mayonnaise, the real Patty, and others. And just saying, watch out, you may recognize yourself in the show. So that kind of rekindled a relationship with some of these folks I hadn't seen since, middle school or high school. But Facebook is another amazing tool. Facebook, I have this love-hate relationship with, but I would say, some of these folks I am friended with, and it's just a way for us to have our families keep in touch with each other, and that has helped a lot too.
Now, speaking of which, when you were in our podcast a few years ago, you were discussing about a story that you wanted to do, this one last story about Doug, in which it was about him going to a reunion and seeing everybody and how they would be now. Is there any chance of it coming out really soon, or is it still in the work in progress?
Well, I love that question. I have, since we last spoke, I actually wrote that core scene, that scene that's really based on a thing that happened in my real life, like a lot of the stuff in Doug. The 10-year later reunion, a high school reunion, where Patty Mayonnaise, well, I keep saying Mayonnaise, it's Patty, it's another Patty, but Patty reconnected with me, and I did write a scene based on that. But for now, I don't know what's going to happen with it. The rights to Doug are being for future projects are held by Disney, and at this point, they're not expressing any plans to move forward with it. But I'm going to remain hopeful. Let's say that if the fan base will stay strong, and if they make their desires known, kind of like they did with Splat, I think anything could happen.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm not sure if you know this, but Mitchell Kriegman actually wrote a novel about a year ago about the continuation of Clarissa Explains It All, called Things I Can't Explain, in which he talks about how Clarissa's life was in her late 20s and how she's a journalist and how she's basically living her life as an adult. And if anything, Jim, since, you were really known for, doing art, you can probably make it into like a graphic novel. Maybe you can make it into a book, just like what Mitchell did for Things I Can't Explain. So, anything's possible.
I think that is a genius idea. And I don't know. I think there's some people maybe out there that would like to know what happened to Doug and his friends, just like Mitchell did with Clarissa. And I would love to do that. I think that it's a genius idea about the graphic novel, to make it really visual and fun to look at. And I'm thinking that's a great idea.
Again, just like we said in the podcast, I mean, if you put that on Kickstarter or anything like that, people will absolutely go crazy for it. Now that the show celebrated its 25th anniversary, and now that a new generation of kids are watching Doug, as you mentioned in the podcast with Hector Navarro, and I just think that, I mean, people will really go nuts over it. And I did briefly read about your discussion about where the characters of Doug would be now in the Entertainment Weekly article about, how you see that, Doug and Skeeter would be roommates in New York City, and that, maybe him and Patty won't possibly be together. So yeah, that's actually really interesting, because it kind of reminded me of the series finale of The Wonder Years, in which the main character, Kevin, he's always had a crush on Winnie, but then at the end, he and Winnie don't get together. So, I mean, whatever you decide on, just that would be great. But if that were to be the case, in which Patty and Doug don't get together, then hey, that's real life. Sometimes when we have our first crushes, we don't end up with the same person that we first fell in love with. So we'll just see.
Well, I like the way that landed. We'll just see. I think that anything's possible at this point, but I think you said it well, that when you start taking an interest in other people, rarely does your first relationship does it end up being the one. But who knows? I think that's something that the fans would like to find out about, and so yeah, let's keep talking about that. That sounds like a lot of fun to resolve that.
Sure. Now, speaking of anniversaries, at the time that we're recording this podcast, next week is the 20th anniversary of Disney's Doug. And you were mentioning before, I don't know if anything of, if it's going to be happening for Disney regarding about that, the same way that Nickelodeon did on, meeting up with the cast members and all that kind of stuff. So, were there any things from Disney that you still, look back on, just as fondly as you did with, doing the Nickelodeon version of Doug?
Boy, no one's ever asked that. That's a great question. The main thing that I love about Disney is that they kept Doug alive. That Nickelodeon had wound Doug down. They were in their minds sort of felt like it had run its course. I felt very different. I felt like there was a lot more to be told. And Disney picked it up, and obviously we made a lot more stories and a movie and books and all kinds of stuff. And I loved, we changed, some people complain, some of the fan base complains about how Disney, quote unquote, messed up Doug. But I would have to say that a lot of that was my doing, that I'm the one I felt like Disney gave me a lot of control and said, "What do you want to do?" And I was looking for a new approach to Doug. So things like changing, Patty's hair gets short and Roger gets rich, and all those things that we changed up for the new shows helped the writers to have a new angle on how the jokes worked and stories. I moved it to half-hour stories instead of 2 11-minute stories. That allowed us to do more complicated storytelling. We did a ton of Quailman episodes. I love that we could continue exploring Doug's mind, and so I'm grateful for Disney for letting me do it.
Yeah, and also a thing that I really did like about the Disney version of Doug was that I was able to expand the characters more. I know that Doug was about Doug, obviously, but I felt that the characters were able to showcase on who they can become. Like, there were some episodes focusing on Judy, and I know that we briefly talked about that you wanted to do a spin-off series based off of Judy. And then there were some episodes focusing on Skeeter trying to catch the monster in Lucky Duck Lake, and some episodes focusing on Patty having to deal with the personal issue of, Miss Crystal being her stepmom, and so on and so forth. So I think that, for the most part, there were some, things about Doug that, in the Disney version that was able to expand, and it was able to, put into different perspectives on these different characters. And I think that, for the most part, that's what I really liked about it.
Well, that's great, what you just said. You sort of get it, what we were trying to do, and I'm thrilled that you feel that way, because making those longer stories, I think they were like 24 minutes to be exact, and you're right, we could expand in terms of any individual story. We felt like we had time now to look at other characters. It was sort of like Doug was becoming a more sophisticated show, and it was kind of growing up with the fan base. And we had a blast figuring that out. I had great writers working on it. Ken Scarborough is one of my favorite writers of all time, and just completely understood who Doug and his friends were. So, yeah, it was great to keep, pushing the world out and making it feel complete.
Right, exactly. Now I have a really silly question for you, but I was just wondering, what is Bluffington's obsession with beets about? And I'm not talking about the band, I'm talking about the vegetable. What is their obsession with the vegetable?
Oh, okay. Well, a couple of things. Let's start with, Doug is pretty much a cartoony, exaggerated version of me and my memory of being a kid. And I hated beets. We had a garden. We grew all kinds of stuff, But when Mom pulled out the pickled beets, it was just, I just did not like them at all. So that makes that vegetable stick out in my head. But the other part of it was our family went on a family vacation, a big one, cross country. And I noticed, especially out west, especially when you get into California, where a lot of agriculture is going on, you pass through these little towns, and it says, "Welcome to blah blah, the artichoke capital of the world," and welcome to the cabbage land, and they really celebrate these particular things that they can grow there. And I just thought, oh, that's great in terms of making this place feel real in a quirky way, to make beets a money crop for that area. And so we built that into the backstory and use it a lot, actually. Our writers really got into all that stuff for telling stories, and so that's it.
Yeah, when I was visiting Walla Walla to check out a possible school that I was going to be going to, there was a section of the school that was growing onions, and there was onion patches everywhere. And so I can understand where, that kind of sentiment comes from, in which there's a certain place that has, a fruit or vegetable that they're proud of. Like, I live in Florida, so we have oranges. So, same thing with California with their oranges as well. And, New York and up, northeastern, states have apples and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I can kind of see that.
Orchards, peaches, and pecans, and peanuts. There's these different things that the states are proud of.
Now I know that we briefly talked about this in the podcast where, discussing about like episodes of Doug that maybe you wanted to do, or we were talking about the brief spin-off series of Judy. Was doing more Quailman segments on the Disney version your kind of way to expand the story of Quailman? Because I know that in the interview that Matthew Klickstein did, discussing with the other writers and yourself, that you guys were even talking about doing a Quailman series. So was that kind of your way of putting more Quailman episodes in the Disney version?
Absolutely. You just nailed it. I loved Quailman. I think we were getting a lot of good feedback from others that thought it was fun and funny, and it was sort of the most exaggerated storytelling we did about Doug. And I thought, I want to do that. And so I wanted to make sure that we had at least 13 episodes of Quailman, because that would constitute a full season if we wanted to spin it off and get rolling. So that was very purposeful, and we worked hard at trying to make that work. And as we talked in our last conversation, Judy, I just thought she's just a really strong character. Becca Lish does that voice. He really understood the character and was funny and powerful. And I thought a good, strong female character like that could carry a show. So we had that show idea called Judy, Judy, Judy that we wanted to spin off. But, these things have yet to happen. But, again, we live in hope.
Exactly. We live in hope in which, anything is possible. So, yeah. Speaking of, the beats, what was the process of writing the songs for some of the songs from the beats, like I Need More Allowance and Shout Your Lungs Out, Killer Tofu, as well as Banging on a Trash Can?
Oh, wow. Great. The beats, we've already talked about the vegetable beat. And then as a rock and roll band, to me, it was just sort of a collection of great rock and roll bands from the 60s and 70s. I just think that was just a great, great time to be a kid musically because of all this, what they call the British invasion, and the notion of the Beatles and the Who and Led Zeppelin and all these groups coming along that were so strong. And so it was great to mix that up and tell those stories. I think Alan Silberberg is one of the writers on the series. Basically got the notion of Killer Tofu in motion, let's say, in the script that he wrote. And then Fred Newman and Dan Sawyer, our music and sound guys, would take that and turn it into a song. And that's what they did on all of those you just said. Kenny Scarborough, one of our writers, was really strong at writing music, very talented that way. And so Banging on a Trash Can was his idea, basically, and he really pushed that along and made that happen. But a lot of them, I Need More Allowance and those that's really pure Fred Newman and Dan Sawyer. Like the writer might indicate a song here, and we give that to them, and then they just take it and just go. So they had a lot of fun being that rock and roll band.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. In fact, I'm not sure if you know this, Jim, but there's on YouTube there is a metal band that actually performed renditions of the Beat songs.
Really? Oh. Huh. If you have any clues about how I can find that, I'd love.
Yeah, I'll give you the link on YouTube. I'll give it to you when we're done recording this podcast. What are your favorite episodes of Doug, both the Nickelodeon and Disney version?
I would say in the Nickelodeon ones, the Nicktoons shows, Doug's Lucky Hat was my favorite. I just we were under such pressure to make Doug, and I worked really hard to try to keep it true and all that. So it was very consuming. But finally, my lovely wife and I pried away for a week of vacation, which freaked out the production group, but we did it. And we went to the Caribbean. We love to scuba dive, and we went there. And while at this place it was like a Club Med thing, meaning not a place that's for singles, but a place for families. But you kept seeing people over and over. You'd sit together and eat family style and all of that. And there was this boy there, part of a family, who always had on this hat, this blue and red hat that was kind of frayed, but you could tell that was part of his identity. It was always on his head every time I walked by him or saw him at the beach or eating in the restaurant, and that's what's got that going. But the way the story is told is very different from the rest of the series. It's much airier. It's got a lot of space in it for music, and the theme of it had this, I think, this bigger, more expansive notion of how do good and bad things come into your life, and what causes that, and what do you do with it, and all of that. So I just love that show. And the Disney one is back to Quailman, the Dark Quail Saga, written by Joe Fallon, is brilliant. It's funny, it's complex, it's just nonstop, and I think it may be the strongest one we ever did. And it was using the golden salmon, which was sort of a superhero bad guy who disguised himself by not smiling, which was just very silly. But he's also sort of the suspected new love interest for Patty that made Doug in his real world. It made him crazy. And I just thought it had great emotional arc to it, but it was very funny, and I love that show.
Yeah, those are great choices. I was wondering another thing. When first pitching Doug over to Nickelodeon, for the most part, when it came to that kind of narrative, there hadn't been a type of show like that since at least the Charlie Brown and Snoopy show back in 1983. So was it hard to pitch it to Nickelodeon saying, okay, this is a show about a kid who's going through everyday situations. It's nothing to do with action. It's nothing to do with, like, silly jokes or colorful worlds or whatever. So was it hard to pitch, or was it like a relief for Nickelodeon to see something completely different?
Well, I'm grateful for Nickelodeon for allowing this show to get made, but the answer to that, the focus is going to be Vanessa Coffey. Vanessa is what made that show happen. That she saw in that simple pitch I did, she saw that Doug was me, that I super knew this world because of that, and felt it very emotionally and viscerally. And I think that from the beginning, she could see that Doug plays out his drama both in the real world, but also in his imagination, thinking of the very best and the very worst kind of things that could happen, which created all these characters like Quailman and Smash Adams and Race Canyon, all these people that made it fun and funny to, hopefully, to see Doug's emotional arc of figuring out stuff and being a kid. And you hope, of course, that kids out there are going, hey, wait a minute, that's the way I feel. That's really what you want to get at. And but I'd give a boatload of credit to Vanessa Coffey.
Yeah, Vanessa was very, very smart in choosing what Nicktoons would be presented over to Nickelodeon, because for the most part, when it came to like what the shows were on at the time, I mean, they were very well known, but it was the 3 original Nicktoons that made it more well known. And it was because of, what the Nicktoons presented, we're still remembering them fondly 25 years later. And, just with, shows like Doug and all the others that came out, I mean, they are very, very important to our pop culture, even still to this day. Speaking of which, I noticed when looking, at all the things that Doug produced, I noticed that there weren't a lot of merchandise on Doug. Like, I mean, there were a handful of VHS tapes, sure, but there wasn't a lot of, like, Doug dolls or anything like that until the Disney version. Is there a reason on that?
Well, that question could really be directed at Nickelodeon, but here's my take on it. Remember that Nickelodeon, this was a first. They had not done this before. When you get to Disney, you're in their wheelhouse. I mean, that's what they do. and so to make toys and books and a feature film and all that was that was what the engine that pushes Disney along can do best. Nickelodeon was brand spanking new at all that stuff, and they, you know, these shows started up, and they did the first thing they made for Doug was a snack tray with a piece of art on it, and I just thought, I get the logic that they want kids to have their little breakfast snack while they watch Nicktoons and all that, but what an odd choice in terms of fun, you know what I mean? And then Ren and Stimpy exploded. It just went way out there. I would argue it happened with a much older target audience than was appropriate for Nicktoons. But at any rate, I think Nickelodeon was charging off to try to get out in front of that. And then, of course, Rugrats became extremely popular and strong. And Doug kind of drifted back to that third position. And I just don't think they saw it as the one they wanted to focus on with off-channel stuff. And Disney felt very differently. And they had the mechanism to do it and made a ton of stuff, actually. So, I don't know. That's what I would guess. I'd call it growing pains.
Yeah, when we met Vanessa over at the Slime Book event, she was telling Kevin when he saw that he had the Disney Doug doll that, we actually had a prototype of a Nickelodeon Doug doll, but it never got released, and I still have it somewhere. So I thought that was really interesting.
I'd like to see that.
I want to see that, too. Maybe the next time you see Vanessa, please, maybe tell her to post a picture of that Doug doll, because I would love to see it. All right, there's just a few more questions right before we wrap things up. So, when you were doing the Doug-umentary, the top 10 questions that the fans asked for Doug, and the one question that everybody wanted to know about was Doug ever going to kiss Patty? So, do you still get bombarded with that question even still to this day?
That documentary really said it, that forever was the number one question. There were other questions like, why are all the characters different color and all that, but when is Doug going to kiss Patty was a big deal. And you know what I've noticed over the years that has shifted, and rarely do I hear that question asked now. And I attribute some of this to the fan base has gotten older, and I think they have shifted their thinking about Doug. And whenever I run into somebody that's a fan and they want to say something, it has shifted from that sort of visceral, immediate thing that you might have wanted to know when you were a little kid. And now the conversation has shifted to them wanting to say something like, thank you for Doug. It gave me a moral center, or it showed me how to become a man or a woman, or it got me through my childhood, or some epic thing they're trying to say in like one or two sentences. And it's always gives me goosebumps. It's amazing. But it does feel like some people grew up and really made a connection with those characters in that world.
Yeah, when I did that video on what made Doug influential with its simplicity, I received a lot of comments from people saying that, Doug was very important to me when I was a kid, and its simple approach made it very relatable for me. So, yes, I do agree, Jim, in which, yes, Doug may be very basic when it comes to like a kid going through his everyday struggles, but because of that, everybody can put themselves into what Doug was going through, and it still affects people. I mean, again, going back to that interview with that you did with Hector, you went to that school with fifth graders, and half of them know what Doug is, and they saw it, and they're probably going to get themselves invested in it, just like all the kids from 25 years ago got invested into it.
Amazing. I hope you're right, because that's beyond my wildest dreams. That would be amazing if it just keeps going like that.
I think it will, because, for the most part, Doug was very unique, and it led up to a lot of other cartoons to follow that formula of let's make kids go through everyday situations, and people are able to gravitate towards it. So what you did for Doug is going to be forever out there in our society, and I think that for the most part people will still have a strong connection for it, whether it be the Nickelodeon version, whether it be the Disney version. Regardless, people will still forever be appreciative of what you were able to give with Doug.
Speaking of goosebumps, I think I just have a few. I mean, even the notion of this going on, continuing to go on, is just hard to imagine, but wonderful to think about. So thanks.
You're very welcome. All right, I think we can wrap things up right now. So do you have any upcoming projects that you would like to share?
Well, here's the thing. There are development things I've done through the years that are very self-conscious. You know, maybe Disney would bring a book and say, "Can you develop this into a series?" Or they brought 101 Dalmatians to me and said, "Can you make this from the movie? Can you make it into a TV series?" Those kind of projects, and they're fun and challenging. But my very favorite, this is going to be so predictable, but it's when you really look up and realize there's a show idea, a world given to you. It's not like you roll up your sleeves and go, "You know what, I think I'll develop me a show." It's just the ideas start coming, and you hear the voices, and you see these settings, and that's what you hope for and dream for as a world builder or a creator. And I have found, since we've moved down here to coastal Georgia, we've been deep in the scouting program, and we spend a lot of time out in nature. We're out in kayaks and on mountain bikes, and I have found opportunities even to work with the Department of Natural Resources a little bit and have created some characters that are looking at the beauty of nature and the fun of being outdoors, and this is just something that's just been swirling and continues to swirl around us. So that's the main one that I'm working on, is a show that's really featuring the outdoors and nature and how good it is for you and how much fun it is. And it's kind of, the tone of it's kind of PB&J Otterish, but specific to what I'm talking about. So anyway, I'd say that's the primary one. But I have one or two others right behind that. One of them's a little darker, a little older, and we'll see.
All right, wonderful. So, Jim, once again, thank you so much for taking the time for this podcast. It really means a lot to me.
Well, thank you. Thanks for asking. It was a lot of fun.
And that is it for this episode. I hope that you guys have been enjoying the month of the 3 original Nicktoons that we've been celebrating throughout the month of August. And hope to see you around in September. So take care.
Not just cartoons.
We're Nicktoons.
Not just cartoons.
We're Nicktoons.
Not just cartoons.